The galactic Concord had extended countless invitations to rising species before, but none had ever replied with a refusal so blunt it bordered on offensive. Humans had simply returned a single word, no, with no elaboration, no diplomatic courtesy, no gesture of respect. Across the Concord's many sectors, officials replayed the message in disbelief, convinced it had to be a mistranslation. Their computational linguists verified it repeatedly, confirming the tone was unmistakably deliberate, not accidental, not emotional, just final. That was what unsettled them most. Primitive species shouted, panicked, groveled, demanded explanations. Humans didn't. Their dismissal carried a quiet certainty the Concord couldn't categorize. It defied every precedent. The council chamber erupted into arguments as factions debated what such insolence meant. Some declared humanity reckless and irrational, pointing to their turbulent history as proof they didn't understand the stakes. Others insisted it was a strategic maneuver designed to gain leverage. A few, far fewer than the rest, urged caution. They noted the speed with which humanity had unified communication channels, the way their message had been routed through secure, multi-layered relays the Concord couldn't fully trace. Those subtle signs suggested a species far more prepared than the Concord expected, but such warnings quickly drowned beneath the dominant narrative that humans were merely stubborn primitives resisting inevitable assimilation. To the Concord, dialogue wasn't a request, it was an expectation. They believed every species wanted access to their resources, trade networks, and interstellar protection. The idea that humanity might not want to be part of their carefully engineered order seemed inconceivable. This belief bred arrogance, and arrogance had long shaped their perception of Terrans. Their analysts compiled extensive dossiers highlighting humanity's violence, rapid industrial expansion, and unpredictable political shifts, concluding that denial was nothing more than a species attempting to appear stronger than it was. Such assumptions allowed the Council to view humanity's refusal as bluster rather than calculated strategy. Yet beneath their confidence ran a subtle undercurrent of unease. The first contact probes they had sent years earlier had logged inconsistencies, unexpected technological signatures, anomalous energy readings near Luna, and encrypted communications that their intelligence algorithms failed to decipher. These anomalies were dismissed as noise or Earth's experimentation with primitive high-density reactors. Even now, the Council refused to consider that such data indicated advancement. They preferred the familiar narrative: humans were volatile, clever enough to cause trouble, but too primitive to resist a coordinated interstellar authority. On Earth, the message had not been crafted out of defiance for its own sake. In the Terran Strategic Assembly, the refusal was a carefully debated decision. Humanity had been monitoring the Concord's activities for far longer than the Concord realized. A century of quiet observation had revealed patterns: species absorbed under the guise of diplomacy, sovereignty eroded step by step, until worlds became vassals to the Concord's peacekeeping administration. The Assembly agreed they would not entertain negotiations framed as demands disguised as invitations. Human diplomats recognized the language for what it was: domination wrapped in politeness. The message they sent back was not intended to provoke but to draw a boundary the Concord could not reinterpret. A single word made manipulation impossible. It denied loopholes, prevented rephrasing, and established that humanity operated on its own terms. There would be no misinterpretation of intentions, no opportunity for the Concord to extract concessions through linguistic ambiguity. The refusal was a shield, clear, controlled, and confident. As the Concord deliberated their next move, they completely misread the quietness on Earth. They assumed the lack of further communication signaled indecision or fear. What they failed to see was the synchronized activation of secure defense protocols, the silent movement of orbital assets, and the existence of strategic networks that had been developing for decades in preparation for external contact scenarios. Humanity had never expected peace through negotiation with an interstellar authority that demanded compliance before offering respect. Instead of responding with frantic transmissions or pleas for clarification, Earth maintained absolute silence. That silence spread through the Concord like a cold draft, subtle but deeply unsettling. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a species that had already made its decision and saw no reason to justify it. For the first time, some council members wondered if they had misunderstood humanity entirely. But doubt came too late, and the dominant voices insisted the humans would bend once pressured. They prepared to escalate. They believed humanity ignorant. They were wrong. The Concord's internal analysis chambers activated within hours of humanity's refusal, pulling in specialists from every member species to dissect the implications. They approached the problem with the certainty of an empire that had shaped galactic politics for millennia. To them, humans were a predictable variable, ambitious, impulsive, and emotionally driven. Their historical archives showed a species prone to conflict but limited by short lifespans and relatively young technological development. This narrative framed every conclusion the analysts reached, reinforcing their belief that the refusal was nothing more than a bluff made possible by distance and ignorance. They reviewed humanity's scientific leaps, noting how quickly Terrans advanced from combustion engines to orbital habitats. Yet instead of questioning how a younger species had achieved such progress under constant internal upheaval, they reduced it to chaos-fueled adaptation. Their models predicted that under coordinated pressure, humans would abandon pride in exchange for survival. This expectation shaped the next phase of their strategy: force dialogue by demonstrating overwhelming superiority. They believed a controlled display of force would shatter human confidence without causing unnecessary harm. Deep in the Concord's intelligence divisions, however, dissent simmered. A small circle of analysts had tracked anomalies for years: unusual radiation signatures near Earth's moon, unexplained disappearances of Concord observation drones, and the development of encryption protocols so advanced they resisted Concord decryption arrays. These anomalies didn't fit the expected pattern of a developing species. The dissenting analysts warned that humanity's technological base was not being accurately measured. Their concerns were circulated, then promptly sidelined. Leadership dismissed them as an overreaction to a single brusque message. High Command's confidence was reinforced by their last direct probes, which captured images of relatively modest orbital infrastructure. They interpreted the lack of visible fleet presence as confirmation humanity had no significant military capability beyond its home system. The idea that Terrans might be concealing assets was never seriously entertained. Every assumption aligned with their belief that this was just another emerging species resisting authority out of stubbornness or fear. The Concord's military strategists convened next, examining potential scenarios for engagement. They charted human industrial output, calculating how quickly Earth could produce warships. Their projections suggested it would take decades for humans to pose a credible military threat. This timeline cemented their conclusion: humanity could be coerced into dialogue long before becoming dangerous. The plan they settled on was a standard enforcement pattern used countless times before: deploy an intimidating but non-lethal fleet, blockade key orbital lanes, and initiate contact under controlled conditions. Political leaders approved the operation immediately, convinced it would resolve the situation with minimal conflict. Their arrogance ran so deep they never once considered that humanity's refusal might have been backed by capability rather than fear. A dispatch was sent to the 7th Concord Expeditionary Fleet, one of their most flexible and decorated peacekeeping forces. The fleet accepted the directive with confidence, its commanders expecting a straightforward operation involving a technologically inferior species. While preparations continued, internal discussions revealed how profoundly the Concorde misunderstood humanity. Multiple council members argued that Terrans were incapable of long-term strategic planning due to their individualistic culture. They insisted that the refusal was emotional, not calculated. Others claimed humans were bluffing to hide instability within their leadership structure. Every evaluation circled back to the same flawed premise: humanity's potential was capped by its history of division. Their planning meetings reflected this bias. When reviewing the possibility of unexpected resistance, they limited their contingencies to isolated attacks rather than coordinated defense. Even the minority who warned about humanity's rapid adaptability were ignored. Their reminders that humans had mastered complex technologies far earlier than most species were dismissed as statistical anomalies. By the time the fleet launched, The Concorde was unified in the belief that humans lacked both the organization and the infrastructure to resist. They expected the Terrans to panic when confronted by vessels that dwarfed their largest stations. They expected negotiations to begin the moment their fleet arrived in orbit. They expected compliance. What they never questioned was whether their expectations were built on faulty assumptions. They didn't consider that humanity's refusal wasn't the start of conflict. It was the warning that the Concorde had already crossed a line they didn't recognize. And as their fleet moved across the stars, convinced of its inevitable success, the Concorde remained blind to the reality waiting for them beyond Earth's atmosphere. When the Concorde fleet entered the outer boundary of the Sol system, they expected immediate reaction, panicked transmissions, scattered military chatter, or a diplomatic request for clarification. Instead, they were met with absolute stillness. No broadcasts, no distress calls, no orbital redeployments detectable by long-range sensors. The absence of noise unsettled them more than any threat could have. Species under pressure always reacted. Humanity did not. The Terran networks shifted into blackout, redirecting all communication through internal, encrypted lines the Concorde could not penetrate. Every probe sent ahead vanished from their tracking arrays without a trace, leaving nothing but static behind. The silence that followed was not natural, it felt engineered. On Earth, citizens carried on their routines, but beneath the surface, entire infrastructures transitioned into coordinated readiness. Automated defense systems synchronized with orbital arrays buried under lunar regolith. Subterranean command centers activated isolated networks built to operate independently of global communication grids. Even civilian data streams rerouted into hardened channels, removing conventional patterns the Concorde relied on for psychological analysis. The Concorde interpreted this as chaos, never realizing how deliberately synchronized each layer truly was. Terran intelligence agencies observed the fleet long before it crossed the heliopause, their sensors tuned to signatures the Concorde assumed were invisible to emerging species. Human analysts mapped every vessel's position, formation, and emission pattern, refining models with a level of precision the Concorde didn't believe Earth capable of. Each reading was quietly relayed to the Strategic Assembly, whose members maintained the same silence that had already unnerved the Concorde's diplomats. Humanity had no intention of opening communications now. The refusal had been issued once, repetition risked dilution. The silence was not a negotiation tactic, it was a boundary. Earth's leaders understood that answering again would imply uncertainty, or a willingness to compromise. So the world stayed quiet, united in a discipline that confounded the fleet's observers. Terran behavior contradicted every prediction the Concorde had built. A species supposedly driven by emotion was acting with perfect composure. The deep space observation stations hidden behind the moon's far side tracked each fleet maneuver without emitting detectable signals. Their cold-running systems operated using radiative patterns designed to mimic lunar heat signatures. From these vantage points, defensive assets positioned themselves with deliberate patience. Massive kinetic platforms anchored themselves into pre-aligned firing arrays. Interceptor wings shifted into shadowed orbits, powered down until their launch windows opened. Human vessels did not reveal themselves. Concealment was their first line of strategy. Inside Earth's command networks, no speeches were given, no morale campaigns launched. Humanity understood the gravity without theatrics. Military personnel executed their roles with steady precision, guided by protocols refined through a century of planning. Humanity had prepared for contact, not the idealistic version plastered in popular media, but the more likely scenario where an interstellar authority attempted to dictate the terms of coexistence. Their readiness was not built out of paranoia but out of history. Terrans had learned too many times that peace was only secure when backed by the ability to resist. As the Concorde fleet advanced deeper into the system, they misinterpreted Earth's quiet as indecision. Fleet commanders recorded the lack of visible mobilization and concluded humanity had accepted the inevitability of Concorde authority. They saw no orbital battle groups, no planetary shields, no superstructures. The absence comforted them, validating their earlier assessments that humanity remained technologically behind. They never considered that their own scanning arrays were being subtly distorted. Every sweep passed through manipulated interference layers crafted by human specialists who understood the limitations of Concord's sensor algorithms. The fleet believed they were seeing the system clearly. They were not. Human diplomacy remained dormant by design. Every attempt the Concorde made to initiate communication was ignored with the same unnerving consistency. Automated relay stations responded with nothing but carrier tones, offering no foothold for negotiation. The fleet interpreted this as fear. On Earth, the silence represented something else entirely: alignment. Political divisions faded under the shared understanding that sovereignty was not up for debate. Humanity wasn't preparing an attack, it was preparing certainty. The planet operated with the stillness of a bowstring pulled taut, waiting, not with panic, but with resolve. And as the Concorde fleet approached orbit, convinced it faced a reluctant and overwhelmed species, humanity completed its final quiet preparations, unseen and entirely underestimated. The Concorde fleet broke into low orbit expecting to encounter a panicked world grasping for dialogue at the last moment. Instead, their arrival was met with the same chilling quiet that had defined every step into the Sol system. Their commanders mistook stillness for surrender, ordering formation, tightening maneuvers, and preparing a staged intimidation sweep. They intended to broadcast a final demand, confident that the sight of their colossal vessels blotting out the sky would force humanity to respond. But before the transmission could be delivered, their comm arrays flickered. A subtle distortion spread across their channels like a ripple, severing synchronization between ships. Diagnostics triggered instantly, yet every system reported normal function. Only the operators registering the growing unease felt anything was wrong. On the far side of the moon, concealed Terran assets came alive without visible signatures. Human strike groups ignited cold launch drives, propelling themselves silently into pre-coordinated vectors. Their hulls absorbed ambient radiation, presenting no readable profile to the Concorde sensors. The fleet didn't even register the approach. The first sign of human presence came as a sudden blackout in the Concorde's tactical overlays. Navigation grids scrambled, targeting systems lost orientation, and internal data pathways failed simultaneously across every flagship. It wasn't an attack meant to destroy, it was a precise, surgical intrusion engineered to disable function without causing injury. Humanity's cyberwarfare algorithms tore through Concorde firewalls in seconds, exploiting vulnerabilities the Concorde never considered significant. Their digital architecture, designed around centuries of stability, was never prepared for the kind of adaptive, self-refining infiltration human engineers had perfected. Entire command consoles went dark as Terran code flooded through their networks, rewriting access permissions and isolating weapon controls. Human specialists had spent years modeling the Concorde systems based on captured probe data, and their intrusion moved with the efficiency of a blade slicing through fabric. While the fleet struggled to regain coherence, Earth initiated the second phase. Kinetic lances, dense projectiles accelerated through magnetic rails, launched from hidden platforms near the lunar surface. They traveled without propulsion, guided by inertial systems that left no energy trail to detect. Each lance struck with mathematical precision, targeting non-critical structures, engine housings, comm towers, shield projectors. The impacts never breached a single hull, but the shockwave of realization spread through the fleets as entire cruisers lost thrust or rotated helplessly into drift. The Concorde had prepared for symbolic resistance, not a strike so clean that it demonstrated overwhelming capability without a hint of recklessness. Before the fleet could regroup, Terran interceptor wings materialized from the shadows. Their drives emitted signatures that flickered just long enough for Concorde sensors to register before disappearing again, like ghosts slipping in and out of existence. They zipped past Concorde vessels at speeds the fleet's tracking arrays couldn't follow, sweeping through exposed relay points and cutting off secondary systems with controlled electromagnetic bursts. The Concorde watched, stunned, as their ships became powerless constructs floating under Earth's gravity well. Human vessels never fired a single explosive weapon. They didn't need to. Every maneuver, every action, conveyed a message more effective than any broadcast: humanity could dismantle a Concord invasion force in minutes while avoiding unnecessary harm. The Concord fleet finally understood the silence. They had been speaking to a species that didn't posture, didn't bluff, and didn't negotiate from weakness. As human strike groups stabilized into formation directly in front of the immobilized flagship, not a single Terran weapon locked onto a vital system. They simply hovered there, perfectly aligned, engines cold, a demonstration of precision the Concorde had only ever seen from their most elite units. For the first time, fear replaced arrogance. Not fear of annihilation, but fear of what humanity's restraint implied. The Concorde had come expecting to intimidate. Instead, they witnessed the controlled dismantling of their own power, executed without aggression, pride, or chaos. Humanity had answered, not with words, not with threats, but with mastery. And as the fleet drifted helplessly above Earth, every Concorde officer finally grasped the truth: the refusal wasn't defiance. It was humanity drawing a line they had no intention of letting anyone cross. Drifting powerless above Earth, the Concorde fleet waited for the retaliation they had always associated with a cornered species. Instead, the immobilized vessels received something they had never encountered after a defeat: restoration. One by one, systems flickered back to life, not through internal reboot protocols but through an external correction so elegantly executed it felt like the work of their own engineers. Safety interlocks released, damaged circuits rerouted, and dormant cores reignited with calibrated precision. Humanity had not only neutralized their systems, but repaired them faster than most Concorde technicians could have managed. It was not mercy. It was a demonstration, control so complete it rendered resistance meaningless. Terran Command opened a single narrowband channel once all ships were stabilized. No grand speech, no triumphant declaration, just a calm, clear transmission that left no room for interpretation. Humanity had chosen its moment carefully, waiting until the Concorde fully comprehended the disadvantage they were in. The voice that resonated across every bridge spoke without anger or triumph, only certainty. It informed them that negotiation was possible, but only under fundamentally different conditions than the ones the Concorde had attempted to impose. Humanity stated that sovereignty was absolute, that Earth would never accept oversight, regulation, or strategic containment disguised as diplomacy. The words carried weight not because of their tone but because they followed an action that shattered every assumption the Concorde had constructed. They had believed humans emotional. The broadcast was controlled. They had believed humans unpredictable. The entire operation had unfolded with precise sequencing. They had believed humans limited. The fleet's helpless drift invalidated centuries of Concorde doctrine. By the time the message ended, the fleet's commanders understood they were no longer interacting with a developing species. They were facing a civilizational force that had engineered its response for maximum clarity. Back in the central chambers, the Concorde leadership listened in stunned silence as reports streamed in. Their most trusted fleet had been neutralized without casualties, their systems overwritten without damage, their tactical assessments rendered obsolete in minutes. Analysts scrambled to reinterpret humanity's capabilities, finally acknowledging the anomalies they had dismissed. Council members who once mocked the warnings were now forced to confront a reality in which humanity's potential had been dramatically underestimated. The fear that spread across their ranks had nothing to do with violence. It stemmed from the realization that humanity had exercised restraint. The fleet could have been destroyed. It wasn't. A follow-up transmission from Terran Command arrived as the Concorde attempted to form a coherent response. Humanity formally invited the Concorde to discuss coexistence, but only as equals. The message stated clearly that Earth did not reject dialogue. It rejected terms built on presumption of superiority. Cooperation, trade, research exchange, all were on the table, but only if rooted in mutual respect. The alternative was a future in which the Concorde would waste resources challenging a species that had just dismantled their assumptions with surgical ease. For the first time in generations, the Concorde Council fractured under the pressure of its own miscalculations. Some leaders advocated immediate acceptance of the new terms, believing further escalation would jeopardize their political stability. Others urged caution, fearing that acknowledging humanity as an equal would disrupt the power structure they had built across the galaxy. Yet even the most stubborn faction struggled to deny what the fleet's data revealed. Humanity was not an upstart civilization seeking approval. It was a rising power with the discipline, capability, and unity to reshape the galactic order if provoked. In the end, the Concord's reply was simple. They agreed to dialogue, real dialogue, not a disguised declaration of authority. Their message contained none of the arrogance that colored their earlier communications. It was direct, measured, and respectful. They requested a neutral meeting point, willing for the first time to share the table rather than dominate it. When humanity received the message, they answered with the clarity that defined every step of this confrontation. Cooperation would be welcomed. Partnership was possible. But submission would never be entertained. The Concord's final acknowledgement, transmitted quietly across secure channels, marked the turning point that would ripple through the galaxy for centuries. Humanity had not won through destruction or intimidation. It had won by demonstrating that strength is clearest when exercised with control. And as the Concord recalibrated its understanding of the species it once sought to guide, the truth settled across the stars. Humans did not rise by asking for a place in the galactic order. They rose by defining the terms of their existence, and making the galaxy listen.